For about the first week or so, it was quite successful. Israel was, if we can use the expression, getting away with murder. But after about the first week, it began to fall apart, partly because Al Jazeera had somebody or someone's, I'm not sure if it was one person or several, stationed in Gaza, and also because, as we all know, the print media and the mainstream television and radio no longer control our access to information, and a lot of the truth started to come out. And then, of course, it turned into a complete disaster once the Israel withdrew and people were able to enter and see what happened. I actually asked some people, why do you think Goldstone came out with such a harsh report? I understand tomorrow Christine Chinkin will come and you might want to ask her, but people told me in part it was because he was absolutely shocked by what he saw in Gaza. It was just so appalling, the magnitude of the devastation. And at that point, the game was up.
Stand up and speak up.
I'm with Veterans for Peace. We've been doing nonviolent peacekeeping training for a while, follower Baj Khan, and I'm wondering what you think in the current situation the future of nonviolent peacekeeping is in Gaza and the West Bank.
Well, there are two separate questions. Actually, there are three questions, and I'll have to deal with them expeditiously because of time constraints. Number one, nobody has a right to tell Palestinians that they have to use nonviolent methods to free themselves from an occupation. So I'm not lecturing, I'm not going to proceed to lecture Palestinians, though there are, as that locution has it, there are rules of war, one of which prohibits the targeting of civilians, and if we want to apply the rules of war, we have to apply them in whole, not in part. So that's the first point is I want to be careful not to come off as pontificating and lecturing about how Palestinians should conduct their resistance, except to enter the caveat that if you want to make recourse to the rules of law, it's not like a Chinese menu. I'll take one from column A, but I'll skip column B. No, it comes as a piece. I think, in my opinion, the nonviolent resistance has real possibilities and prospects for defeating the Israeli occupation. It requires work by the people there, but it also requires work by us. And our main responsibility is to tell the world what the record shows. The Palestinians aren't asking for the stars, the moon, and the sky. All of the organizations, both those in power and those which are in opposition, have signed on to a settlement of the conflict consistent with the international law and the enlightened public opinion. The only outliers are the United States, Israel, and a few South Sea islands. And that's easy to see. It's not complicated. All you have to do is go to your computer and enter under Google peaceful settlement of the Palestine question. And what will come up on the screen is the annual vote of the United Nations General Assembly for the terms for resolving the conflict. And the terms presented every year in the UN General Assembly is the two-state settlement on the June 1967 border, the right of the Palestinians to exercise self-determination, the whole of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and a just resolution of the refugee question, the basis of the right of return and compensation. And the vote every year is the same. The whole world on one side, the United States, Israel, Nauru, Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands on the other side. I mean, it would be funny were it not tragically true. The 22 members of the Arab League in March 2002 called for that same settlement of the conflict and even went beyond those terms and said to Israel, if you agree to these terms for ending the conflict, we'll normalize relations. The Organization of the Islamic Conference, including all the Islamic countries in the world, including Iran. And when I refer to that UN General Assembly vote, it includes Iran. they've also endorsed the Arab League terms for settling the conflict. So the only obstacles are the U.S. and Israel. And that's our main job. We have to tell public opinion what's preventing a resolution of the conflict. And then I think it would require time to go into it, but I think the prospects would be reasonable for nonviolent civil disobedience to succeed. But there's a third component, and the third, it's not enough that the Palestinians are willing to commit themselves to that. You need a leadership. And for various reasons, most of which are familiar to most people in this room, there isn't currently a leadership that's able to create that kind of movement.
I'm going to call on someone way, way in the back. So here, yes.
Thanks for the talk. This is a reflection of all this. In the context of the aftermath of the Gaza attack, the Goldstone report, which has your book and you discussed tonight, has seen opinion, both Jewish and non-Jewish, turn more against Israel as the Gaza attack has made it nearly impossible to defend Israel as people hold liberal ideals. Do you think there's any credibility to the claim that Netanyahu and the Israeli government are purposely doing actions provoking Palestinians, such as the recent designations of the sites in the West Bank, the continued construction in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and the whole situation that just happened with the U.S., in order to incite Palestinian violence, riots, and possibly an intifada, in order to show how the Palestinians are violent, terrorists, and not committed to peace, in order to give Israel a justification, both political and moral, to defend themselves, quell the violence, and continue the occupation without taking its house. So, great piece.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there is, you don't want to get into the realm of conspiracies, mostly because, not because all conspiracies are untrue, but because it's very difficult to prove. That's what makes it a conspiracy. But I think it's reasonable to infer that at least part of what you're saying seems to me true. Designating those national religious sites obviously in part was playing to his domestic right-wing constituency, but in part I think it was one of these desperate gambles to, if we can call it, religiousize the conflict, because once you turn it into a religious conflict, and there really isn't a rational basis for trying to resolve it. So Netanyahu would much prefer to be dealing with fanatics and crazies than he would with rational people willing to settle the conflict. And that was incidentally one of the main reasons Israel attacked Gaza, because Hamas was becoming too reasonable. It was expressing its willingness to settle the conflict in the June '67 border. And for Israel, this has always been a disaster. One Israeli political scientist, Avner Yaniv, he coined a nice phrase, I always remember it. He called it those Palestinian peace offensives. And it's those peace offensives that cause Israel so much grief. And now Hamas was conducting itself responsibly. As the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs put it, it was careful to maintain the ceasefire, and it was proposing a reasonable, rational settlement of the conflict in accordance with international law, UN resolutions, and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. Well, for Israel, that was a disaster, and Hamas had to be destroyed.
Yeah.
If it were left for Israel to decide what kind of peace she wants, do you think there would be peace in the Middle East?
Well, it depends on what you mean by would there be peace, because in order for there to be peace, there would have to be, on Israel's terms, there would have to be acquiescence by the other side to abject submission. And if the other side accepted abject submission, yes, then there would be possibility for peace. But if the other side did not accept that condition, then the likelihood of there being a peaceful settlement on Israel's terms is rather remote. because the terms would not allow for, I'm limiting myself to the Israel-Palestine conflict, not to the regional question, but the terms would not allow for, we can use the term, and I see no reason why we shouldn't, don't allow for Palestinians to carry on their lives with minimum human dignity. And that's what's being denied them.
Yeah. So the guy behind you, and then you can be next. Go ahead.
First of all, could not the slaughter in Gaza be seen in part as Israel trying to correct its own kind of Vietnam syndrome that resulted from the relative lack of success in Lebanon? Secondly, you said that this human rights report was consequential for the first time. I didn't quite understand, except your reference to the way it might resonate with liberal Jews in the United States, how this report is consequential. And finally, are you satisfied that allegations of plagiarism against Harvard Law faculty working in this field have been investigated in a satisfactory way?
Should I take those questions in reverse order? Because I have a feeling when we get to the third, a gong is going to ring, or a hook will come out.
Yes, it will.
On the first question, I think you're entirely correct. Israel's main purpose for going to Gaza, and they didn't really hide it, they were saying it every day, every minute of every day, they said it was to restore their deterrence capacity after the defeat they suffered in July, August 2006 in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the Party of God. And they wanted to restore that deterrence capacity. Deterrence capacity is just one of these fancy technical terms probably invented at the Kennedy School, like that other idiotic term, asymmetrical warfare, which means absolutely nothing. But basically, restoring deterrence capacity, Ariel Sharon in 1967, just before the attack on Egypt, he put it well. He called deterrence capacity the Arab world's fear of us. That Israel was worried that the Arab world no longer feared it after it happened in 2006, and Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, was rubbing Israel's nose into the ground and saying, we're no longer afraid of you, attack us again, we'll beat you again. And Israel was getting very upset. It didn't feel that it yet had the possibility of a military victory over Hezbollah. Then it tried to conscript the United States into going to war against Iran, and that way restore its deterrence capacity. The U.S. vetoed that idea, and so now it looked around for some place to restore its deterrence capacity where it can assure itself of a victory, and the place, of course, was Gaza. The problem with Gaza, however, was everybody knew Gaza had no military capability. So how are you going to restore the Arab world's fear of Israel by attacking a place which is defenseless? And that was a problem for Israel. And the way it worked itself out of the problem was exactly as I quoted the Israelis. They said, we were going to go into Gaza and behave like a mad dog, behave like we're lunatics. We will attack all of the civilian infrastructure. We will, as Tzipi Livni said, we will go wild. We'll carry on with real hooliganism, and that way we'll transmit to the Arab world that if you mess with us, it's not going to be a war. We're just going to annihilate you, like what we did in Gaza.